3D printing has come an awful long way in the last few years since I started my 3D printing journey. The amount of detail that these 3D printers can achieve has increased dramatically over the last few years, as well as the other extra functions that they have. Hello everyone, I'm Matt, this is Model Minutes, and join me in this video as I build not one, not two, but 4 mini dioramas based on a sci-fi desert planet. So let's get into it. Before we begin, full disclosure, this Saturn IV Ultra was provided free of charge by Elegoo for the purpose of review, however all opinions remain my own. So now I did get this printer pre-release, but unfortunately due to a lack of time I've not been able to really get into it and have something out for when the printer went public. I do know that there are a number of very comprehensive reviews out there, so I'll add a link to the ones which I found particularly helpful underneath the video. Here though, I'm going to be showing you how I use the printer to create my projects and also sharing my thoughts on what I think about this printer. So starting off, this was a pretty simple product to set up. Everything pretty much comes pre-assembled and the bits that don't just plug into the relevant holes. I'll throw a list of features that this printer has on the screen now, which is annotated from the instruction manual. Features that I particularly like are the 12K resolution. The tilting bed mechanism is an interesting feature I'd not seen before. The flippy lid as well is a nice handy addition. However, there's no easy place to grab this to open it, so you kind of have to use both hands, I find to be the easiest way to do it. There's no air filter included in this one, but there is a vent at the back which can be used as an expansion port for an external filter which Elegoo sells separately. There is a touchscreen display which is quite responsive and is easy and intuitive to use. The vat is easy to remove, simply featuring screws which hold it down in the relevant places, and the print bed attaches with a simple slide-on clamp. There is this, which is a drip tray which is provided, and it's a vacuum formed piece of plastic. Now originally I didn't know what it was and I thought it was just a bit of packaging, and I almost put it out with my recycling until I realised that I actually needed it. So the whole point of this one is that when you take your printed item or the whole bill plate off of the printer, you may get drips everywhere, and this is just designed to catch them. However, it's a bit of a cheap add-on, and I didn't find it to be particularly well made. I imagine over time this one will disintegrate because it's very thin plastic. Perhaps Elegoo will manufacture a more robust version in the future. One interesting feature that I do quite like is the AI camera, which is pre-installed. This allows you to monitor the prints in real time and also create time-lapse videos of the actual prints coming out. Elegoo have also very kindly provided me with some of this ABS-like grey resin. So let's get that stuck into the vat and get something printed. Because I'm a big fan of sci-fi, I really wanted to do some from a desert planet. And for this one, I've decided to go with Grinning God's STL pack, which I found on my mini factory. The STL bundle that I went for comes with a variety of different subjects, and they are all modelled to a relatively high degree of detail. Having purchased and downloaded the STL files, I then imported them into Chitterbox, which was the software provided on the memory stick included in the box with the printer. I've used Chitterbox a number of times before and I find it fairly easy to use, so I simply repositioned all of the parts onto the build plate how I wanted them to be printed, then added the relevant supports so that hopefully everything would print nice and well. So I do have two options here. I can either send the files if I've connected Chitterbox remotely to the printer via Wi-Fi, or I can send them using the USB stick and plugging the USB stick into the printer and then saving the files that way. The benefit of having the Wi-Fi, as mentioned before, allows you to track the progress of the print using the Chitterbox Manager software. But it was at this point here where I've got the print ready to go. It was telling me that it was going to be like 6 hours to print all of these files that I've resized and filled up the build plate with. But when I actually pressed play, that wasn't happening. I was getting like one layer of the print every 3 minutes, and when I checked the machine, it was actually telling me that it was going to take like 8 days to print this out. So I don't really know what was happening here. And also, because it's such a new product, there wasn't anything online to Google it. So with that, I think it's probably time to ask someone for some help and guidance. So James from LPJ Models, who's already got one of these printers as well, is probably the right person to ask. Hey James, you alright?
Oh, hey Matt, how's it going?
Yeah, not bad. Just a quick question. You know, you've got a Saturn 4 from Elegoo, haven't you? The Ultra.
Yeah.
Have you had any issues with it?
I personally haven't had any issues with it, no.
Oh, because I've got this really weird like error where I sliced it into two box, said it was going to take 6 hours, and then I sent it via the Wi-Fi to the printer, and then it said it was going to take 6 hours. That's fine, makes sense. Press play, and then it was like, oh yeah, you know that 6 hours we were talking about? Nah, it's gonna be like 8 days. I was like 8 days to print this, like they're only like this big. So I looked at all the settings, I checked everything, but I was watching it on the camera and I thought, oh, maybe it's just a communication issue. But actually it was literally printing like one layer every 3 minutes. That's not right. That's not right at all, is it?
That's
like,
bananas.
Did you didn't have any of that? You didn't have any like weird time stuff?
No. Luckily I did not. I know I can be impatient with print times, and that would drive me right up the wall.
It was mental. I literally have no idea like why or what to do to fix it. Like I can't Google it because it's so new. No one else has had this printer. I mean, obviously, by the time this video goes out, I'm sure loads of people will have had the printer, but like now, I haven't got any info about it.
Yeah, that's a tricky problem. Did you use the files for Chitterbox that were supplied on the USB?
Yes.
Okay, because there were several updates since then, and that might be the reason that you're having those problems.
There's been updates already.
Yeah.
Oh, I just because it was so new, I literally took the memory stick out, plugged it in, and used the software that was on there. So you're saying that there's already updates for it?
Yeah. It could very well be that.
Right. Okay. Well,
I don't know.
I'm gonna go check the Chitu box website and have a look right away. I mean, I think it was like 1.96 was the version that they put on the memory stick. So I guess we'll see if it's been more updated. Cool.
Okay. Well, best of luck with that. I look forward to seeing what you print with it, because it's a fantastic machine.
Oh, brilliant. I look forward to actually getting my prints out in a sensible time. Cool. Cheers, James.
All right. Catch you later.
Bye.
Bye.
So I guess that's a lesson learned. Always make sure that your software is up to date. So having updated to the latest version of Chitubox, I then resent the files to the printer, and lo and behold, it was actually going to take the amount of time it said it would. So after about 6 hours, I removed all of the parts from the build plate, and then I gave them a quick wash in some isopropyl alcohol and also cured them under UV light. I think on the whole, the prints have come out really well. I don't really think I had anything fail. Perhaps the really tiny figures that I also tried to print, I sort of had an idea to use these, but they've come out so small that maybe it's not really worth it. I think maybe some of those little bits there have gone missing, but on the whole, the prints are pretty good. I think they're a little bit smooth and glossy, maybe due to a lack of attention during the washing phase on my part. But on the whole, I think the details have come out really nice, and the layer lines aren't particularly visible. These were all printed at a 0.02mm layer height. But yeah, I am really happy with how these turned out, so let's get stuck into diorama number 1. So for this one, I'm going to be using the ornithopters, which are the dragonfly-like aircraft that this STL set comes with. The wings need to be glued into their open or closed positions using some super glue. So I've printed out 2 ornithopters. One has their blades in an open position and the other in a closed. When that was done, all of my 3D printed parts would be given a zenithal highlight. So to start with, they were all spray painted black, and then they were given a white highlight using a white spray paint, as if the sun is shining down on them. When that was dry, I mixed up a darker olive colour, and then painted this onto the fuselage of the ornithopters. Gunmetal grey was used on the joints for the wings, and also some other areas of the ornithopters which potentially may need it, such as landing gear and weapons. The canopy and windows were simply painted with black paint, and I would also use some gloss on this to give them a more glass-like look. The rest of the wings were then painted with a very dark blue. I quite like using coasters as little bases for dioramas, so I've got this black painted one, and I'm positioning the ornithopters where I think they'll look quite good. I scored out an area where I thought perhaps there was some sort of concrete or hard standing, and then this area was painted with a neutral grey. For the rest of the diorama base, I put down different shades of yellow to then mix onto the coaster to give it a sort of deserty sand-like colour, but mixing it as I went would allow for a little bit of variation in places. At the scale that these helicopters are, I think the sand would not be visible and it would look practically smooth from the distances that it was being viewed. I gave the ornithopters a dry brush with some of the sand colour, I think this was a Vallejo buff, just to make it blend in with the environment a little bit more and make it look a little bit dirtier. I then used some super glue to glue them into position on this little diorama base. And to finish off the scene, I added a couple of the very small figures, which I'm pretty sure I scaled to be the right size for these ornithopters, just to give a sense of scale to make you aware of how big these ones were. These figures had been painted black and then simply dry brushed. Being so small, I didn't see the point in picking out individual details. And with that, the first of the 4 dioramas is now complete, and I'm going to be calling this one Pre-Flight Checks. So the story here is perhaps these 2 pilots are ready to take their ornithopters out on a mission, and they're just checking over their aircraft before they take off. Perhaps they've got some last minute notes to discuss about the context or the purpose of the mission. On the whole, not bad for a pretty quick and small diorama. So let's now move on to diorama number 2. For this one, I'm going to be using these 3 figures which look a bit like witches or wizards, and also the other 2 figures which clearly represent some other kind of guild. Perhaps this is a meeting between magic and science. For these figures, I'm not going to waste any time, and I'm going to be using Army Painter speed paints to complete these. So these Army Painter speed paints are from this starter set that I've got here. It comes with 8 different colours, which do give a good variety of shades. However, I think over time things will become a little bit monotonous. I do mix them into different shades, but I think it's probably time to look at getting some more paints. However, I did buy these using the generous support from my Model Club members on Patreon and here on YouTube. A massive thanks to these guys on screen for the extra support they give the channel. I'd also like to take a moment to welcome the latest members of this club. They are Jason Pearson, Yohuta, Vasily, Jacob the Draw, and Craig Johnson. If you'd like to learn more about what becoming a Model Club member means, take a look at the link in the description. But anyways, back to diorama number 2. Each of these witches was going to be painted with a different colour of robe, just to make them stand out a little bit. And the good thing about these Army Painter speed paints is that they add contrast and shade as you're going through, so it's a pretty much one coat and you're done. The only problem I did have really was the fact that the spray paint I've used to give that zenithal highlight, the white is a little bit grainy, so I have lost some of the details due to this. And also that texture, the grainy texture on the models now, has kind of wanted the paint to flow into areas it shouldn't have, but that was relatively easy to rectify with a little extra paint in those places. With those done, I decided to move on to the other two figures. But I wanted these to represent the same sort of society, so I decided they would have the same colour palette, that being a blue and gold. I did originally paint the gold areas with a yellow from the Army Painter Speed Paint set, but I wasn't particularly happy with it, so I did actually swap out to a Vallejo gold acrylic paint to go back over these areas and make them a little bit more vibrant. And with those figures now done, it's time to get them on a base. This again is another coaster. This one is from IKEA and it's already been spray painted black on one side. For this base, I am going to put down some sand texture. So I brushed PVA glue all over the top of it, then glued down my figures in positions which I thought would look good for them having their meeting, and then applied a generous amount of this all game terrain sand mix. Again, this is another product that I purchased with the support of my Model Club members. I think on the whole this sand mix does look okay from certain angles and distances, but up close I think the grains are a little bit too large for the scale that I'm working at. But with that done and having removed the excess sand, I think this little diorama, number 2, is now complete. And I'm going to be calling this one The Meeting. I think perhaps if I'd done a bit more forward planning, I could have 3D printed some additional extras for this particular diorama, as it does look a little bit bland, but then again, the desert can be quite bland as well, can't it? Especially a sci-fi desert. So perhaps where they're meeting is in the middle of nowhere because they've got some sort of clandestine discussion that they need to make. But let's now move on to diorama number 3. So for this one, I'm going down in scale. I've printed out this sandworm, and I did scale it down quite a lot so that it would fit onto this little diorama base. Again, this is a different coaster, which I have also spray painted black. First up, I applied household filler onto the top of the little coaster. Then I pushed the sandworm into place. I would carefully manipulate the filler just a little bit more to make sure it actually looked a little bit more natural in its environment. When the filler had dried, I painted the sandworm, again using Army Painter Speed Paints, taking care to paint its giant mouth, although not so giant in this tiny scale, with a different shade. The desert sand would be painted an appropriate colour, but I need to imagine that we're looking at this from quite a distance away now. So at that scale, I think things would be more or less the same shade. But when that was dry, I would dry brush it with some light pale sand colour, just to add a little bit of variation and bring out those highlights. The final thing I wanted to do was glue on one of the desert dwellers who is riding this giant sandworm. This was the smallest 3D print that I made on the printer, and I had to be really careful removing it from its supports, but I think it's done okay. This was simply painted black and given a slight dry brush because it's just so small. And with that done, I'm calling diorama number 3 the sandworm. I think this particular print would have been really fun to do on a massive scale to give a real sense of how large these sandworms could be. Perhaps next time I could print out a small ornithopter which is flying around it to also give a greater sense of scale. On the whole though, for a very quick diorama, I don't think it looks too bad. But anyways, I think it's time to move on to diorama number 4. Again, I've got another one of these coasters from IKEA, which I've painted black. I am going to be gluing on some rocks, which I found in my garden though. They were then given a quick paint with a lighter colour of paint to hide the sort of moss that's been growing on them over time and also make them look a little bit drier. Having also painted the base a sand colour as well, I would apply PVA glue like I did before with the previous Witch's diorama. And once again, the same all game terrain desert sand texture was applied to this glue. For this one, there are a number of STL files which I got from this STL pack, which depict different factions. Here it would seem that there are 3 different factions of soldiers, 2 soldiers in each faction. Once again, I'm going to be using the Army Painter speed paint, and I'll be painting each faction in a particular colour. So the first faction that I wanted to do was in a light brown. Perhaps they're trying to use some sort of camouflage for whilst they're in the desert. To add a bit of variance, I would use a darker brown on certain elements of their uniform. And I will paint all of their swords in a metallic gunmetal-y silver kind of colour. For these figures in particular, I'd also use this on their helmets. The handles of the swords would be painted in a dark blue. Some gloss varnish would be used on their visors to give them a glassy kind of look. And with that, I moved on to the next faction. So for these guys, I went with a dark green, which I mixed up from more speed paints. Again, I would use a different shade of green to pick out different elements of their uniform, particularly their shoulder pads and their helmets. Once again, their swords were painted in the same way as the previous faction. And finally, I'd replicate the steps on the last faction, which are perhaps the desert dwellers, and these guys have a very dark, purpley blue kind of colour scheme. Smaller details would of course be picked out in the same kind of colours as the other figures that I've done. But on the whole, these ones were very simple to do. A quick dry brushing of a desert sandy kind of colour would be given to all of the figures to help give them a little bit more contrast and also make them look as if they have actually been in the desert. I would focus a little bit more on this desert, highlighting around the lower portions of their bodies, particularly their boots and legs. I then glued all of the figures onto the diorama base. I decided that I would go for the desert dwellers being closer to the rocks, perhaps they know the environment better, and they decided to go for this slightly advantageous position. The other 2 factions were then glued into place and they are poised for action. And with that, I'm calling diorama number 4, which is the last one, complete. I think I'm going to call this one the standoff. Perhaps these 3 different factions have come across each other in the desert and now they're not sure whether they should side with one another to take on a common enemy or just have a 3-way conflict. I think this is probably my favourite diorama as it does have quite a bit going on with the different poses of the figures. Don't go anywhere just yet though, because I do have a bonus figure to paint up. I did print one of these soldier figures into a larger scale because I wanted to see what they would look like if I took a little extra time to actually paint them. So I'm going for a different paint scheme compared to the same figure that I've just done in a smaller size. And for this I want a sort of cream colour for their uniform. This was mixed up and then carefully applied to the majority of the figure, avoiding the areas I want to paint different colours. Once again, the blade of the sword would be painted with a metallic silver, and I decided to paint the visor on his helmet black. So too were his gloves. His boots, shoulder pads, and other elements of his uniform were then painted in a brown leather kind of colour. This would give a nice contrast to the creamy white of his uniform. The handle of his sword was carefully painted in the very dark blue that I've been using previously. Once all of that was dry, I mixed up a very thin dark grey enamel wash, and this was applied to the entire figure, allowing it to seep into all of those nooks and crannies to give a bit of extra shadow and contrast. And then when that was dry, I went back over the figure using a dry brush of the desert yellow that I've been using for all of the figures to give it a bit more of a sandy appearance and highlight those raised details. I then superglued this figure onto this little rock base which I've had in my stash for a number of years now, and with that I called this figure done. I don't normally do figures or miniatures like this, and I'm quite pleased with how they've turned out. Naturally, I think I need a little bit more practice to get things a little bit neater, but on the whole, I'm quite happy with them. I think for my first project using the Saturn IV Ultra though, they're not too bad. On the whole, I found the Saturn IV Ultra to be relatively easy to use. I did quite enjoy having the ability to send prints directly via Wi-Fi and also monitoring its progress. The time-lapse video function is pretty cool as well, and I'm really happy with the quality of the prints that I've had on this particular project. A couple of points that I wasn't too happy with was the tilting hood. Whilst a tilting hood on a 3D printer is a great idea, there was no way to easily grab this one as it sits very flush and there's no handle, so perhaps a handle on a future release would be handy. Also, I think the included drip tray was just a bit cheap and flimsy, and at first, like I said earlier, I thought it was just a bit of packaging and almost put it out with my plastic recycling. I'm glad I didn't, because otherwise when I removed my parts from the printer, I may have got resin everywhere. The lack of a built-in air filter as well was a little bit disappointing, because my previous Elegoo printer, the Mars 2, did have one and it helped reduce the smell of the fumes. But I do my printing in a room away from everywhere else in the house, so fortunately that wasn't too much of an issue whilst I'm focusing my work on other things. As mentioned though, there is an expansion port on the back which I believe has the functionality of plugging in an external filter if you are looking to get one. On the whole though, I've been pretty happy with the ease of use of this particular printer, and I quite like the quality of the models that I've been able to produce in this project. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of my 4 mini diorama builds plus extra bonus figure. Also, let me know what you think of this printer. Once again, thanks to Elegoo for sending out this printer for review. But as mentioned, I haven't done a deep dive, so make sure you check the other reviews which I've linked underneath the video. Once again, thanks to my Model Club members for the extra support. However, if you're not a Model Club member, you can support the channel in other ways, and full information is underneath the video. Alternatively, the best way to help support this channel for free is by subscribing with notifications turned on so you never miss a modelling upload. Finally though, I think from me here in the Desert Planet, it's probably time to say goodbye. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the workbench again next time. Anything we do stupid will end up in the bloopers.
Okay. Bloopers?
Yeah, so I'm sure someone will probably mention it, but if you're wondering, I woke up with this morning and it is quite sore. Not sure what it is, maybe it's from a shaving rash, but it's a bit sore. Hopefully it will go away in a few days. I wasn't, yeah. The level of detail these printers can reproduce has climbed dramatically. I do like to talk about my modeler's journal, but I didn't actually use it in this one. Totally didn't write any of this down in my modeler's journal, probably because it's not a model kit. So how long did this take me? This took me... I think this took me like 4 days to complete. That's it. That'll do. That'll be it. That'll be the take. That's fine.
All right. Happy?
But small problem.
Yep.
I wasn't recording.
Okay. Another warm up.
No, I was recording. I was.
You were.
No.
No, you weren't. Yes, you were.
No, I was recording. I was actually recording. I was recording that. I hope. Once again, his sword would be pain. Once again, the blade of the sword would be paid. I think, though, as a good test to find out how well the Saturn Ultra 4... What is it? Forgotten already. Saturn 4 Ultra. I think that for my first project using the Saturn 4 Ultra, though, and that's it. I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's the video done.